Hello, I'm Luke Scorzel, and you're listening to episode 46 of Bills. Republicans across the country are recovering from what seems to have been a very successful election for Democrats. They didn't just flip 39 seats in the United States House of Representatives, they also picked up an additional 258 seats in state House chambers across the country and 70 state Senate seats across the country as well. These state-level gains resulted in Democrats now controlling the legislatures of 4 additional states and completely controlling 6 additional state governments at the legislative and gubernatorial level. Here to help us break down the election results is Luis Alvarado. Luis has tremendous political experience at the national, state, and local level. He's worked on several presidential and gubernatorial campaigns, and he is the co-founder of Grow Elect Political Action Committee, where he specializes in creating effective strategies to get Latino Republicans elected to municipal offices. Stay tuned for a direct, uncensored interview coming up right after this. I'm Luke Scorzel, and you are listening to Bills. Hello, and welcome back to episode 46 of Bills. Again, we are here today with Luis Alvarado. Thank you so much for joining us on the show today, Luis.
Thanks for the invitation. It's a pleasure being here with you and with your audience. I'm looking forward to a great conversation.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be an excellent recap of what happened for Republicans in 2018. So just delving into that, what do you think went wrong for Republicans on the national stage?
Well, there's never a silver bullet for either side when something goes good or bad. It's always going to be a combination. I like to call it more like an opera that, grows into the crescendo of how election day results develop and how they turn out for each party. And for Republicans, we have been on a steady decline for a while now. And I think as we're probably going to do what everybody does is talk about Donald Trump and the effect, or was it a black hole or was it actually a shining light? And for Republicans nationwide, it turned out to be a black hole. Not only because of what he represents, but I think ultimately he just accelerated. He amplified sentiments that were already there, that were for anti-Republicans, and the advantage that Democrats had. Ultimately, I would like to point out is that they didn't have a deficient candidate on the other side like Hillary Clinton was on 2016 that gave great apathy to Democrats. So what we saw was an energized base on both sides, but when you have both sides equally energized, that means that Republicans suffer the consequences because the majority of the registered voters nationwide are Democrats.
So you mentioned some of the symptoms that have been hampering Republicans for a long time, and maybe that this has been something coming even before President Trump. Is that about right?
Yes, and it's not just the registration. It's because this nation is going through a demographic change. You look at demographic breakdown of this country, and it's not just birth rates or immigration. It also has to be with migration within states. Many Californians have now moved to Texas, and they took their political convictions with them. So we saw Beto actually raising some good turnout in Texas, enough to give Cruz a scare, because now Cruz became the apathetical candidate, and Beto became the charismatic candidate. And that equalized a lot of the voter registration difference that Republicans have in Texas. So that being said, it's a combination of things at a national level that were exacerbated by the rhetoric and the atmosphere that we have in our political climate. You ask nowadays, and people can tell you who the characters are at CNN. They can probably name 5 people who are commentators, and they have their favorites and they have their followings, and likewise the same thing for Fox. So the nation is paying more attention to the political landscape, and the reality of today is that campaign no longer stopped. In the old days, you used to finish on election day, you roll your sleeves and you got to work, and you have now the legislators working it out. Now that's not the case. As a matter of fact, right now I know that there are people already organizing for 2020,
Mm-hmm.
which is 2 years from now. But that is the reality of today's political landscape. People are really in tune to what's happening in Washington, and somehow their fears and their aspirations are really electrified by both parties right now.
And you talk about this demographic change in the country. Well, the stats show that a record 29 million Latinos this year, which represented 12.8% of eligible voters, were qualified to vote in the 2018 midterm elections, according to Pew Research. So Democratic candidates received 69% of the Hispanic vote this year, which was actually up 4% from Hillary Clinton's count in 2016. Republicans just received 29%, which was the same as Donald Trump in 2016 as well. So do you think that Democrats have really taken advantage of that demographic shift to take hold of these Hispanic voters, or is this just a reaction to the malfeasances of the Republican Party?
It's a reaction. Democrats have been deficient in connecting with Latinos. As a matter of fact, they still, this is conversations I had with my Democrat consultant friends, that sometimes they don't see the investment in actually reaching out to Latinos because somehow they feel they're already a known quantity. Latinos are going to be there. They're not going to vote for Republicans. If they show up, they're going to vote for us. So it doesn't become a campaign to influence. It becomes a campaign to get the vote out. Mm-hmm. And they feel that Donald Trump did that for free with the Latino electorate. So really, Democrats didn't do anything specific or different to reach out to the Latino community. And Republicans, likewise, completely abandoned any effort to talk to Latinos. Whereas I was part of the RNC's program when they were looking at what now famously is known as the autopsy after the shellacking that we took a few years back. And the Republican Party decided that, we needed to talk to this new demographics. There was an actual invested effort in doing so. That complete effort has been shelved. And now the Republican Party has no effort at a national level to actually go out and influence Latinos. And rightfully so, because knowing that the commander-in-chief, the president, the spokesperson of the Republican Party uses Latinos as a lynching pin to promote his agenda and to ensure that his base becomes electrified. And that's the choice that the Republican Party has done. And now they're paying the consequences.
So in light of these decisions, what can Republicans do heading into 2020 to capitalize on this vote? I mean, it's such a significant margin of the electorate now, and it would be a shame for either party to just ignore it totally.
Well, 2020 is around the corner, and I think that what Republicans need to do is, we're going to talk about the presidential campaign. I don't see the presidential campaign doing anything different to bring Latinos on board. I think they understand that their best option is to tell the American people that they're the best option for a strong economy, and to pay no attention to all the other bad things that the Republicans are known for or are being blamed for. And ultimately, it's going to be to the individual candidates to be able to present a platform to their own constituents that for that specific district, they are going to be the best representatives as opposed to the Democrat that they're going to be facing in that district. And those candidates who have demonstrated to do that with their own district, have been able to communicate with Latinos. Now, in California, in this last election, that wasn't even enough to save the Valadeos or the Jeff Denhams, who have had great inroads with Latinos in their districts. But the overwhelming sense of retribution against the president's actions was just not enough for them to overcome all the gains that they had made in their own district.
Overwhelmingly, on the national level, do you believe that Hispanics strongly oppose President Trump?
Yes. The main reason why is, the ideological reason for that is because the Hispanic electorate is actually one of the youngest electorate. If you look within the Latino communities, most of them are still in school. Most of the Latinos in the states that really matter, the Southwest, they're still in school. That this demographic change is just in its infancy. The curve is actually going to have more an effect on 2020 and the years after. Whereas the Republican main base is older, 65 plus white male. That's the strong base for the Republicans. And sadly to say, they're dying off. Mm-hmm. So the way you communicate with these both different demographics is completely different. The one is completely opposite to the other. So those Latino Republicans who are in the party find themselves disenfranchised by the president, but some of them may find the president's rhetoric or positions to be okay with them. But you're going to find that those Latinos are probably the older generation Latinos. The newer generation Latinos do not subscribe to Donald Trump's positions.
Mm-hmm. So what can the Republican Party do to reach out to those younger Latino voters?
I think at a national level, there has to be first an understanding of who it is that they are. What are the needs that they're going to be facing as Americans? Because the big misconception in this country is that these Latinos are foreign. You use the word Latino, you automatically think foreign. Well, you don't belong here. You're not part of us. You're usurping this country. And the Constitution says that if you're born in this country, you're an American. But most important, besides what the Constitution says, is if you ask any Latino, especially a young Latino who was born here, is raised here, they don't even speak Spanish. They are Americans. They are the future of this country. And if we can't find a way to bridge the next generation of professionals, of workers, of elected officials that are going to lead this country in this global economy, if you can't present that argument, you're not going to have a chance of captivating their attention. So I ask Republicans and Democrats, for that matter, to really pay attention to the next generation of voters, understand what their challenges and opportunities are going to be, then try to map a way of communicating that it's going to be inclusive as opposed to exclusive, and ensuring that they have first of all, a responsibility to being part of this country, and second, to contribute. We all remember JFK's speech, it's not what this country can do for you, but what you can do for this country. And that's the same kind of speech, maybe morphed in different verbiage, but that's exactly the same sentiment that has to be conveyed to this next generation of American voters from both parties. And I invite both parties to really consciously look at the next generation and ensure that they have an investment effort in helping them out.
Would you say that some of the Republican language on immigration then in regards to building the wall, I mean, a lot of this is coming from Trump, obviously, but I think the Republican Party has become kind of this representative of those ideologies. Do you think that's part of the language that's exclusive to Latino and Hispanic voters that you're talking about, or can Republicans both simultaneously support strong immigration reform while still garnering that vote? How do they do both?
Well, let's talk about, quote unquote, the wall, mm-hmm. and what it represents. And I think for different demographics, it means completely different things. For those of us who do believe that the United States of America is a sovereign nation and has a responsibility to protect the citizens and ensure that the government, specifically the federal government, defends against foreign invaders, yes, we need to have a strong border security program. Mm-hmm. Yet, for many, what they actually hear, especially in my Latino community, is that the wall is being used as an excuse in conjunction with other rhetoric that is clearly marked to say, once again, like I said at the beginning, hey, you're a foreigner, you don't belong here, you don't deserve to vote, you don't deserve to be considered a citizen of this country. So basically, it becomes a racial hatred or a racial fearness that leads to separation between both entities. And that's where Latinos feel that they are personally being persecuted. So it's not the issue specifically of the wall as in security of the nation. It's specifically the wall as in, we don't want you guys here. And that's what makes Latinos feel unwelcomed by the Republican Party. Uh, and I mean, to support them, many people would say, well, where's your proof? And the reality is because the sentence after that is, well, we need to change the Constitution to, to stop these anchor babies from being U.S. citizens. And you can't get more direct than that with regards to we don't need you guys, or we don't need your kind here.
Yeah, and many were shocked by that language coming from the president just days before the midterm elections. I mean, yeah, and I guess we'll have to leave that one. But
well, you got to remember, he's talking to that Appalachian coal miner. Hey, that's music to his ears because they feel that their jobs are being taken by somebody who's in this country, when in reality he doesn't understand that his job is actually taken by somebody out there in China who's actually creating a product at a much lesser cost than the one that he or she is producing here in the U.S.
And I would like to talk about California, too, and what happened here. I wish I could say for you was better, but it wasn't better, I guess is the short answer. California Republicans lost 7 seats in the United States Congress. They lost 5 seats in the California State Assembly, where they now just control 19 of the 80 seats in the chamber, and they lost 3 seats in the state Senate.
In the words of President Obama, we got a shellacking in California.
Yes.
I think that, everybody was talking about the blue wave, and it wasn't a blue wave. It wasn't a tsunami. It was a trickle, but that trickle was strong and long, and there are a lot of things that happened in California that made California particularly vulnerable for Republicans to the Democratic strategies. I can talk about some of the tactics and dynamics and strategies that were used. Ultimately, it was the push of Donald Trump in California. You look at the combination of, once again, demographics in California, major Latino population. I think it's the largest population of Latinos in California. You look at some things that the Democrats had done. Now all of a sudden everybody's talking about ballot harvesting. Ballot harvesting is a law. It was made legal in California a few months ago. I run campaigns, and I knew it was out there. And that, thankfully for my candidates, I didn't need to do it, but I knew it was an option for me. And if I needed to use it, I was going to use it. But, I won 5 out of my 6 races. And the 6th one that didn't make it, ballot harvesting would have not helped. But Democrats used it wisely. They registered more people, knowing that the greater majority of students that are turning a voter age are Latinos. They're pretty smart. They did a pre-voter registration. So now if you're like 17 years old, you can pre-register. So by the time your birthday rolls around, you're already registered. They don't have to go chase you down. That means that there's more people available and more excited about coming out to vote. The third thing they did is they did automatic voter registration at the Department of Motor Vehicles. And that was very controversial because at one point it was discovered that some undocumented people or people who were not eligible to vote were automatically enrolled as registered to vote. And I'm talking about a few thousand people. And I think Alex Padilla, our state Secretary of State, is trying to deal with that storm right now. But I don't think a few thousand people made a difference in California when millions were actually came out to vote. That was definitely a Donald Trump calamity for California. And I know there were some fine Republicans who actually were quite moderate and actually anti-Trump in many fashions that were also swept, by that big wave. And there were some other seats that were affected as well, regardless of not even being a partisan race. In Los Angeles County, our sheriff, Jim McDonough, who was a great sheriff endorsed by many Democrats, suffered and lost to a Latino, in my opinion, unqualified sheriff because, he was a Latino. And LA County is majority Latino now. Latinos came out to vote to castigate those that they felt were not going to be representing the Latino interests.
34% of California's population actually is Latino, and 21% of those most likely to vote in California are Latino as well. And a majority, again, of them are registered Democrats. So what do you think this stage looks like in California versus the national level? I mean, this election, it was already bad for Republicans in California. Like it wasn't like there were seats that they could afford to lose. They lost a lot of what they had, and now it's even smaller. There are parties in the Senate and in the Assembly and in the U.S. House. So is there any future for Republicans in California? Is this just going to become a totally blue state and all the Republicans are leaving to places like Texas, maybe Arizona, and more conservative states? What's your take?
You know, the last podcast I was invited to, we had this discussion with a fellow Republican consultant named Mike Madrid, who my understanding is going to be a professor at USC next semester. And he was like, hey, let's just burn it down and start all over again. And I'm saying, no, there's some redeemable qualities by great people who are already still part of the party that there's no doubt we need to, take a true cold evaluation of what happened and understand, our own party chair, former Senator Jim Brulte, came out and said, California is the canary in the coal mine for the rest of the nation for Republicans, saying, if we don't actually pay attention to what happened in California, this is a prescription for the rest of Californians, starting with the rest of the Southwest. So there is no question the Republican Party has to reinvent itself before we start talking about rebranding itself. I'm looking forward to working with some great people to make that happen. We have an election in February for the California Republican Party. With regards to selecting the next chairman, Jim Brulte's been there for 6 years. There are some that completely are dissatisfied with his performance. There are some that say, hey, it wasn't his fault. His hands are tied. There's going to be a great challenge for the next chair and the next leadership committee. And I think that we're going to have some sobering conversations. There's going to be, at one point, some poignant arguments on where we actually need to go, because there are those that are proposing that we just don't double down, but triple down with Donald Trump's view of what the Republican Party is. And they think that that is actually what's going to make the party grow. And I completely don't agree with that position. We have to be more inclusive. Politics is about inclusion, not subtraction.
And this is a big problem in California, I think, regarding what Trump is saying. You have the migrant caravan, and it's coming up at the California border. And a lot of these other immigration issues are happening here in California and other states as well. But it's an issue, I think, that divides people, Republicans and not here. So do you think California's Republicans, the ones that are left, are more moderate than on the national stage? It would seem like it. I mean, you had Orange County that was the last Republican area in California, yes. Totally switch.
Well, we're definitely more moderate. It's California, for God's sake. I mean, if you compare California Republican to a Montana Republican, there's going to be a world of difference between what the ideology or what they see is important for the nation to move forward. Because let's be clear, political parties are built for one thing: select candidates, propel candidates, fund candidates, and then get them elected. That's the job of the political party. Then after they get elected, then it's up to the party to help, guide them when it comes to policy. But truly, it's the leader's position to take the party afterwards. And right now, the head of the party is Donald Trump. And when it's Donald Trump and all the challenges that Donald Trump is facing, that's going to reverberate on how the elections are. When Barack Obama won his election, it was historical. But once his policies were taking effect and the Democrat Party started to align with how far left the pendulum was being driven by the administration of Barack Obama, the nation responded and gave him his shellacking on the midterms. So we know that the pendulum swings both ways. And right now we're quite divided in our nation. We're truly engaged. Electioneering is going nonstop between one election to the next election cycle. And at one point, it's going to be up to some strong leadership to say, hey, enough is enough. Let's bring the temperature down. But I don't see it in the foreseeable future. I think for the next 2 years, the Republican Party is going to continue to suffer consequences because it's unavoidable. The president will still be president. And I think after 2020, we're going to have a national revival to see how us Republicans are going to be able to respond and to present a coherent message to the American people. Hopefully, California starts the process, and we do have some kind of a revival here in California that may one day serve as a blueprint for the rest of the Republican Party at a national level. But that is still yet to be seen, and I'm hopeful. I'm more of a glass half full than a glass half empty kind of guy.
Definitely. And it seems like Republicans really have two options now: either focus on themselves and rebranding themselves, building up a new party, and then rebranding after that, or take the alternative route, I guess, and say, hey, look at what all these Democrats are doing. Do you really want more of that in our country? So it's either they work on themselves or they go and attack the other guy and see how that works, or maybe even a combination of both. Which of these strategies do you think would work best?
A combination of both, because you touched on 2 points that I wanted to bring up earlier. The first one is when you come to both political parties, you got to see how their donor base is structured. And they're completely separate. The Democrat Party is really a small donation base. They really have the Democrat base conditioned to contribute so they can propel their policies and ideas. The Republican Party is very, very exclusive with regards to their donor base. And those people that usually donate to the Republican Party are, once again, male, Caucasian, over 70 years old, who have done very well. And they dictate how they want to see this party. And a lot of them are very nostalgic about how this country has changed and are okay with the rhetoric that we hear from the president. If those donors continue to be the ones that dictate, then we're not going to see any major changes in our party anytime soon. And that's where I think the party needs to reinvent itself, to actually find a way to disengage themselves from those multi-billionaires who are always the ones that everybody goes asking for the big bucks. The second thing is the advantage that we have, or the opportunity for the party, is, at least specifically here in California, is that Democrats own everything. If they own everything, they control everything. That means when things actually go bad, they can't blame Republicans. There is just no way. When they could have a supermajority in the Assembly, a supermajority in the Senate, and they control the governor's office, and right now they have a surplus. 2 years from now, if that surplus it disappears and they start raising tax. I just read this morning that Democrats are proposing raising taxes on texting. So if you text on your phone, guess what? They want a piece of that. They're going to try to figure out how to raise taxes, because even though they tell us that they have a surplus of a few $1 billion, and that's because Jerry Brown was a little bit conservative and fiscally responsible. We know that Gavin Newsom is not. We know that he's going to try to raise taxes. He made promises to unions that I don't think he can write the check with. And we're all forgetting that California also has a very large pension liability that nobody's talking about. It's the big black cloud over California. So in the next few years, if Democrats completely make a mess out of California, if they start taxing citizens to death, if people start losing jobs, then I think Californians are going to want an alternative. And it's up to Republicans to be the ones that build up that alternative, or it may even be an opportunity for a third party or independent movement to actually start taking shape. Some of our states, have independents that are the leaders of those states, and maybe that is the future, not just for California, but other states.
I think it's interesting on your first point, you brought up the California donor base and contrasted it with the Democratic bases. You see Democrats like Bernie Sanders in 2016, Beto O'Rourke in 2018. They had these massive kind of grassroots campaigns that really brought together a lot of people, and that's where they got the majority of their funds from. Now, that's not to say that Democrats aren't getting money from huge wealthy donors. I mean, Hillary Clinton's campaign, I think, was a good example.
Yeah,
of that.
They still have their George Soros out there. But yeah.
And I think a lot of the Silicon Valley billionaires are, doing their own thing with their party. But how can Republicans really reach that kind of grassroots level? Because then on your second point, the Democrats fail. Okay. It's still up to the Republicans, like you're saying, to build this alternative, and not only build the alternative, but communicate the alternative as being better for the state. It's not just that Democrats fail; it's that Republicans or this third party or another party say, "Look, we're better. This is how that's wrong and going down," and then get people from the Democrats. Because right now, it kind of just seems like all the Democrats in California are really scared of the R behind someone's name, that they're a Republican or that they're not a Democrat, because the Republicans are the so-called party of racists and terrible people who just want to take all the money for themselves, but they're not seen as like this kind party that's actually an alternative to Democrats. So I guess the question here is, how do Republicans effectively communicate that they are the better party?
Well, it's like a chicken and an egg kind of thing. One depends on the other. But I think if you have a charismatic leader, then he or she is going to have to start doing both at the same time. Harvesting new donor base, or educating the current donor base, and ensuring that when they restructure and rebrand the Republican Party, it actually is something that donors are going to feel confident and proud of being part of. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, that the next party chair is actually someone who's just a fire-breathing Trump supporter who is just spilling hatred to everything Democrats. No donor base wants to be attached to that, because then you become a target just like that party leader is. And then you're not going to be building the party. You're going to be diminishing it even more. The second thing is, for Republicans that actually are trying to serve their communities, they're going to have to work twice as hard to prove, they're going to have to disengage the brand that they have. I had this conversation a few hours last night. One of my races was the candidate was being sworn in, and I ran into one of my other previous clients, an elected official, a Republican, who said, "Luis, I'm actually looking at higher office, and I'm going to consider taking the Republican brand off and re-registering as a Democrat." And because his constituents are asking him to do it. Mm-hmm. And if that's going to allow, in this case, him to be successful as an elected official in doing what's right for his neighborhood or his community, then that's what he's going to do. And I can't blame him for that, because that's what the political landscape has become. When the party abandons you and moves away from your principles, me in particular, I'm not a Trump supporter. I don't know if you could tell that, but I'm not a Trump supporter. I was against his policies or his rhetoric from the second he went down the elevator and gave that speech. But for me, it's, there's some things in this administration that are actually okay. But the rhetoric just takes away from that. Instead of talking about things that are actually working in this new administration, everything is focused on the individual. And that's very sad. Very sad, not just for me as a Republican, for the nation as a whole. So I think it's going to be 2 years of more circus politics. I think it's going to be up to the elected officials to really work to connect with their constituents so they can protect themselves from any blowback, regardless if you're a Democrat or a Republican. Because likewise, if you're a Democrat in California or some other states, and your party starts going ultra progressive, and you're a moderate Democrat, guess what? You're going to be branded as the establishment, and they're going to come after you as a Democrat as well. In California, the fastest growing political identity is that of the no party preference. There are more no party preference registered voters in California than there are Republicans. And Democrats are losing a lot of their Democrats to the no party preference because they just don't want to be associated with either party. And that's very unfortunate for our nation, because then what happens is we deplete the good leaders from actually feeling confident to step up to the plate. The hardest thing to do is, to find good people that actually should be leading our nation, our cities, our municipalities, our school districts, but they feel that the political atmosphere is so vile that they just rather not deal with it. And that hurts everybody at the end of the day.
Well, I think it's interesting that you bring up kind of this polarization of each party. I don't know if it's happening in California totally with the Republicans, because I don't know how far to the right you can go. But certainly with the Democrats, I mean, Gavin Newsom is kind of a new level of progressive. You see the same thing on the national stage. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, elected in New York. I know people talk about her a lot. She's kind of a buzzword around Republican circles, but she is kind of representative of this new class of Democrat that says they're not accountable to the party, and they're kind of willing to go as far to the left as they need to institute some of these policies. So back in California, it seems, if Republicans decide to really become the party of the moderate, or the party to those with no party, then maybe they really could make a big difference in these upcoming elections and years. So I don't know that everyone really wants these very far left policies as much as they don't want the far right policies. I think people are fairly reasonable when it comes down to it.
Yeah, but then again, you need the money to be able to propel your message. If, like I tell my candidates, you can be the smartest, most genuine, best qualified candidate for a job, but if your opponent has more dollars, it's not what you are; it's how the opposition defines you. So if they spend money to say you're a scumbag, then to the voter, the only thing they know is that you're a scumbag, because they never get it. Sometimes you can't go meet 20,000 people in your district, right? So you have to utilize communication techniques and tools to actually propel your message and identify yourself with the voters. And money is a very important component, and that's where the political parties have been a big part of that. The other thing we haven't talked about is independent expenditures and Citizens United. Both political parties have suffered greatly because those donor bases that were just so upset because the party wasn't doing exactly what they wanted them to do, because it was up to the leadership of the party to modulate how those donor base were actually how their dollars were actually going to reach the voter. They now have the chance to, forget you. I'll just get 4 staff members, a consultant, a fundraiser, and a lawyer, and I'll go and I'll spill my own voice. You see Tom Steyer going out there to the detriment of the Democrat leadership on his own parade, on his own train, and on his own dime, talking to the Democrat voters. And sometimes it's not coordinated with what the party actually wants. Likewise here with the Republican Party, sometimes you have the extreme right advocating for one issue that may help Republicans at a national level, but really hurts Republicans who are moderates actually come out to vote, like we just saw in the last election.
Maybe that's the strategy for Republicans. I don't know, to leave kind of this party mentality, and if the party's doing an ineffective job, which it almost certainly sounds like they are in California, then hey, I'm gonna go do my own thing, raise my own money, and reach my own voters. And I don't know. Do you think that's just a way to get more radical, or?
It could be, but it takes a lot of work and effort. It's not something you do from one cycle to the other. You need to cultivate that. But I'm confident that the Republican Party, at least in California, is hopefully going to find some sense in finding the right candidate that's going to be able to moderate the message and have enough separation from Washington, D.C. and the National Party messaging that actually can talk and connect with Californians as a whole, and actually propel and help some of the Californians get elected back and take some of those seats, some of those positions. So we'll see. I mean, I'm very confident about that.
Well, kind of getting to the end here, I would like to talk a tiny bit about the candidates that you helped through this election and what some of the strategies you did. You mentioned you had 5 candidates win out of your 6 candidates. Can you just tell us a little bit about how that round of elections went for you?
Well, surprisingly, because it's municipal election, I helped a Democrat get elected. But because this Democrat works with another Republican candidate, and they're both representing a district, and they see eye to eye, so he was a moderate Democrat, and I chose to help that. I also run a political action committee called Truth and Dignity Municipal Leadership here in California, and through that PAC, we targeted and helped. We helped the wrong person get diselected, which opened the way for the right person to be elected. And one of the things that I tell the candidates that I do run as a general consultant is they have to stick to fundamentals. If you're going to build a house, you need to have a good foundation. And it goes with the basic campaign strategies, ensuring that you identify what your message is, ensuring that the candidate is going to be proficient in identifying and propelling their message. Good targeting, understanding who your electorate is, getting good communication tools that actually connect where the electorate is looking at their information. There are some old-time consultants who still have old methodologies that are probably not as effective as they were 20 years ago. I'm talking about slate mail, where most of my efforts are put in social media. I do Facebook campaigns. I do video campaigns for my candidates because that allows them to connect better with our targeted audience and allows them to put their message in front of the voters. And we've been very effective in doing that. My candidates were underfunded and they faced incumbents, which is an additional level of difficulty, and they were all successful because they were the right candidate representing the right message for the electorate, and they were able to convince them that their views and their policies and the way they do business was going to be better for that specific community that we're going to represent. Those are the things that we looked at. And on the last primary, I also ran a candidate for the Attorney General at the statewide level, and he passed on to the general election, but then I removed myself from that campaign. He lost, but he had a good showing. So those are the things that we're looking at. How do we communicate with the electorate? How do we sound like this? It's going to sound ridiculously silly, but you start with, how do we make sure that people know that you're a sane person? Because there are many people running for office you run across, and you go, what in the world were you thinking that you actually have a message that's going to be represented as something sane? You hear stuff like people want to break up the state into like 30 different little states and, things that are just not going to happen. So I start with, some basic fundamentals, work yourself out. If you work in a municipal office, you have to walk. You have to walk your districts. You're going to have to go. I told one of my guys, he asked me, what do I got to do to win? He asked me, how much money do I have to spend to win? And I said, money? It's not about money. You go knock on 1,000 doors and you're going to win. Well, we're going to do the other stuff, but you got to knock on 1,000 doors. And we were outspent 3-1 in that race, and he won.
Wow.
So it's fundamentals.
It all starts at the local level. So, if you're getting more conservatives elected at the municipal level, who knows, do you think that would translate into maybe more offices at the statewide level?
Yes, because what happens is if you actually get to know your electorate for the deeds that you do and the work ethic that you present to the voters, then you have a better chance of convincing them that you're not associated with whatever happens at a national level. One of the races that I was involved with is the mayor for the city of San Bernardino, a city that's been quite challenged financially. And he takes office in about a week. He has a great amount of challenges. And he's a Republican. But he won because his work, his voting record, his everything was put out in the open. And he had constant communication with the electorate, not just 4 years from when they first got elected as city council member, but he continued that process. And those are the things you have to do nowadays. You have to make sure you have a strategy to get elected, but then you have to have a strategy to govern, which in turn will convert yourself into a strategy to get reelected.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Well, it sounds like there's a lot of strategies that Republicans could take from listening to this interview, and I hope they maybe contact you and we can actually have a decent politics again. But thank you so much for coming on the show today, and any last thoughts for our audience?
I want to thank you for putting this podcast together, because sometimes people think that, they're going to, all it takes is to actually look at a headline or, 15 minutes of CNN or Fox is going to give you sufficient insight into what's happening. But you actually have to have an engaged commitment to understanding how the process works, so you can truly understand how it's going to affect you, your family, and your wallet. So I congratulate you for this podcast. I hope you continued success. And for anybody who's listening to this podcast and it's at the end of it, congratulations. I tip my hat to you for being a true patriot and try to understand how to learn as much as you can so you can be a contributor to this great nation. So thank you. Thank you for the invitation.
And that's all for our interview today with Luis Alvarado. And what you heard him say right there is exactly what I try to do on bills. I don't like the 2-minute segments on radio or TV. I don't like the yelling back and forth to where people just come out with an emotional reaction, feeling angry or like nothing's right in the world. On these shows, I like to go in depth with people like Luis to find out what's really going on in the world and find out from their perspective how things are working. So if you appreciate that goal and you'd like to go listen to some more in-depth conversations, in-depth episodes, luckily for you, there are, in fact, 45 more episodes on our iTunes page on theedgeofideas.com. If you head on over there and hit subscribe, then you can be alerted when new episodes come out, and you can listen to all of the other ones that we have. If you'd like to support the podcast, you can head on over to patreon.com/billswithluke and become a Patreon there. Always greatly appreciated. We love our fans. We love our supporters. With that, I will see you next time. I'm Luke Scorzel, and you are listening to Bills.